Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Shaft podcast. With me here is one incredible individual. For a lot of people within the debate space, we've seen him ravage the space with beautiful speeches, very competitive edges, sometimes very fierce in roles that some of us don't want to meet him in, but we've survived this era, and today he's on the shaft to discuss a few things beyond his personal inspirations in some of the things that are ongoing within the world and the Ghanaian political context, to be specific. And so with me on this episode is Solomon Omani-Mensah, who is a law student at the Ghana School of Law. He's also into communications and politics. He's been a very long-term debater from the University of Ghana, representing the university on numerous international debate stages. Welcome, Solomon, to this episode of The Shaft.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew. I should, just for the sake of your audience, I should clarify, I'm not yet in Ghana School of Law. I'm in the University of
Ghana. Okay.
I'm yet to get to Makola, so then, but that's hopefully soon.
That would be soon. Hopefully, let's cut it off. It's a certainty because you get there.
Oh,
But-
amen. Amen.
Yeah, but why law? Because there was a spin-off from economics to law. Why? Because for me, when I looked at you, I thought you'd be the next economics wizard, but now you are entering into law. So I just want to know why the pivot into law.
So let me share this little experience or memory. I remember when I was about finishing junior high school,
Yeah.
we were preparing a yearbook
Okay.
for the batch. If you go back and you check that yearbook, it was 2013. When
Yeah.
you check my profile, you will see career aspiration. What's what there's barrister. Law has always been what I wanted to do. It just so happened that economics was more like a prelude to what was to come, to satisfy what my dad wanted. I have given him what he wanted, and so now I get to pursue my passions.
Okay. You didn't want conflict, so you
Yes.
took the long route.
Yes, let me just satisfy the old man, justifiably so.
Yeah, linking back to the story you just gave about elementary school and the young yearbook, a lot of people say like childhood experiences make us who we are. I look back, reflect on some of the stubborn decisions I made, and look at who it's made me. I remember one time my sister forced me to wash a very dirty pair of jeans I wore, and the back of my fingers peeled off. And since then, I've never liked jeans again. Till today, I don't wear them again, just
Wow.
because of that. So, for you, what were some intriguing childhood experiences you look back on, and then you smile and look at who you've become now today?
I think the fondest, and it's funny I'm calling it fond because back then it wasn't so fun. But looking
Always.
back,
Always.
it was how different I was at home. So I have three
Okay.
other siblings. I'm the youngest child in the family.
Oh,
And my three elder siblings were the typical compliant children. They'll do
Yeah.
what parents want them to do. They don't object to things at home. The kind of kids you want. I mean, even if they stray, they are very quick to apologize. They don't engage in banter. Solomon wasn't like that. And my mother would always complain, where did I go and get you from? Who do you think you are? Pocket lawyer. I remember I heard that phrase a lot. Pocket lawyer. Pocket lawyer. When we say one, you say 1,000. And I always question things. You want to cook yam? Well, I say I don't want it. And you question, how dare you say, yeah, I say I don't want it. I want this. Why can't I have this? I will question everything.
wow.
Everything. And we'll get into quarrels. But I think looking back, it was a precursor of perhaps the kind of passions I was going to follow. Because like you rightly mentioned, if you look at my journey in debates, now law school, Moot competitions, I think all of those things counted in helping make me an inquiring person and someone who was always willing to speak up about things. And second fond memory I'll share is when I was in primary and junior high school. No matter how badly my day was going in school, whenever I remembered that I had a book an unfinished book that I had to read at home, my
Yeah.
mood would instantly get better. Instantly. You could call me a nerd, but again, I'm not surprised
Wow.
because I've always had a keen interest in reading. And once I find something
Interesting.
fascinating, I want to follow through to the end. So yeah, I'm not surprised that speech and reading have culminated into making me the person I
Yeah.
am becoming.
Yeah. It's funny because I've generally hated reading. I don't like reading at all. And it shocks people that how because
Yeah.
people go by this saying that how can you be a debater and not like reading?
Uh-huh.
I I
Uh-huh.
I I dislike reading. I would prefer to watch 3 hours long podcast or a documentary or a movie or if any video content or an audio content. I would prefer that than to read. I've
Understandable.
read to my memory only two complete books that I've started and
Wow.
completed. Most of the time, after I read the preface or introduction, it bores me. I just shut it down and then
Which
never
books
go
were
through.
those? If you can you remember?
The two books I've read were Bloody Ingrate in high school, and
Okay.
then most recently is 21 Lessons of the 21st Century by Yuval Noah Harari. Because
Okay.
those are the books when I read the introduction, I'm like, damn, I need to finish this book.
Okay.
Because
I
every
understand.
single stage there's something fascinating about it. But since aside those books, I would prefer to watch a video than to read.
Wow.
Part
Okay,
of the
well,
reasons why I'm a mathematics preferred person than all the reading
to
subjects.
each his own.
But yeah, down to something you said, debate moot court. There's this public debate out there that one is better than the other, or one is much more difficult than the other, or that one is much more enjoyable than the other. I haven't experienced both, but I've tend to prefer debate, obviously for bias reasons that I've been in debate for all this while. And for everything you compare to debate, I'll tell you debate is better. If you compare model UN to debate, I'll tell you debate is better. If you compare moot court to
That
debate,
much
I'll
I
tell you
agree.
debate is better. That, so I just wanted to get your sense, given that you have experienced both, which one you think you would prefer naturally to fit in, and which one you enjoy doing the most.
This is a difficult question. I don't think I've thought about it.
Yeah,
I can't I have both. But to be fair, I think if I had a single choice to make,
yeah, you
I
do have a
might
single
just pick
choice here.
debate. And I'll pick debate. And I'll pick
Okay,
debate because of the kind of free reign debate gives you.
yeah,
With moot, you are confined. Yes,
yeah,
you're allowed to play around the law, but if it's not there, it's just not there. And
yeah,
there's some fixation on authorities and you trying to stay consistent with
yeah,
what has been established. I'm
yeah,
not one who likes to be bound by rules all the time. So, but debate allows you. Debate you even get to question the constitution itself.
yeah,
You get to,
exactly.
you get to question religion. You get to question the most
Yeah,
fundamental principles that we hold here. And
yeah,
I just like that audacity and the
yeah.
ability to push frontiers that debate gives. So yes, I'll pick debate.
That's now I have now you are my authority. Anytime someone says moot court is better than debate, and now I have an authority to stand on. Because
Feel free to
usually I
make
used to
the
speculate.
uh-huh.
Yeah, and most of the time I used to describe it this way, that think of it as debate is we don't think anything is law. We are discussing whether something should be law. And moot court is more like there are preset laws that we are applying within the scope of a case that we are dealing with. And so for me, I don't like laws. I don't I don't like all those limitations. I need to be able to say God is this and be able to stand by it without necessarily having to sound
Mhm.
offensive or going out of scope. And for me, that was fun and thrilling than moot courts sounded like.
Relatable.
Similar with model UN, like
Yeah.
pretending to be countries and all that. Yeah,
Oh,
the
we
country I don't
don't.
agree with, but they are fun. To be very honest, they are fun
Yeah,
and great, like chambers of nurturing skills and all that. So that's good.
definitely.
Yeah, Solomon, what's your what's your assessment of the current mood of politics in Ghana? I just want your general assessment of Ghana's political system.
Are you asking with respect to the perspective of the citizenry?
Yeah,
Oh, I would say largely disappointing, if I'll be frank. And this is in reference to my immediate circles, my other social circles,
yeah,
social media, and what I glean from the sentiments out there. Because it looks like we are at a point where even persons who have
yeah,
long identified with either of the two major political parties are
yeah,
beginning to feel increasingly disappointed with their work and their
yeah,
output. So I'll
yeah,
say largely there's a lot of apathy, especially among the younger population. There's a
yeah.
lot of it, a lot of apathy, disappointment, and unfortunately, I think it's a state of things today.
Hmm. People tend to see politics from the perspective of the flashy headlines we see out there, or the few glimpses that we get into political speeches or political activity that is exposed to the press. But behind that, it's about 99% of political negotiations, political work, political culture, and behavior that the public never get to see. And I'm curious as to your individual experiences within maybe a few political chambers that you've had to walk through, and whether or not you see a stark difference between the spectacle that the public has shown and what goes on behind those spectacles.
Well, I don't think there's exactly a stark difference. Well,
Yeah.
because even behind closed doors, you see a lot of that kind of disagreement and friction. And I'm saying this with reference to my experience in campus politics, because campus politics in Ghana, as many would know, is sort of
Very, very.
a microcosm of the larger political
Yeah.
scene. The
Yeah.
same dichotomy plays out over there. The difference, though, is that there are a lot of times when compromises have to be reached. And so,
Okay.
for example, let's say that the one who wins the presidency is
Yeah.
different from is from a different political leaning than,
Yeah.
say, the Speaker of Parliament, and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
need your
Yeah.
budget passed. You cannot work without that speaker and the
Yeah.
speaker's faction. So you
Yeah.
have to do some, but people will call it deals, but I think it's an essential part of politics. You have to
Yeah.
compromise. You see it play out even in Western politics. You want a
Yeah.
bill passed, well, they don't agree with this and that. You have to compromise. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
and aside the compromise on policy and issues, I think perhaps the stark difference plays out more in terms of relationships,
Okay.
because you would see persons bickering on TV and on radio, but I can
Yeah.
assure you behind the scenes they are very close friends. These are people who were
Interesting.
schoolmates together. They have
Hmm.
intermarried among their families. They have
Yeah.
very close relations. And so, beyond the political divide you see out there, trust
Yeah.
me, a lot of them, from what I've seen, have very strong relationships behind the scenes. And they help each
Yeah.
other as persons. So, the last thing you want to do as a follower is to then, based on that front you see outside, take things personally and then
Yeah.
antagonize the other party. It will be to your own detriment. So, yeah,
Yeah.
there is that stark difference behind the scenes.
Interesting. Two questions spin off from this. The first one is on the compromise you mentioned. Currently, the political setup in Ghana, it's clearly, like you said, there's a speaker from the opposing party or the minority party, and then there's a president from the ruling party. And we've seen some of the most contentious disagreements in parliament happen within this period. Probably headlining them is the e-levy uh, disagreements, lack of consensus building, dragging issues out. And like you said, consensus and compromise is great. But it seems like when we were faced as a country with the point where we had to really come to a consensus or find concessions and compromises, we found it much more difficult to navigate our way through it than we seemed like we should have. Because almost every other government had had a resounding majority in parliament. And so probably some of these stark compromises didn't have to be reached. The first time the parliament and the legislature and the executive had to do that at a very heightened extent was within this current dispensation. And we nearly dragged things over for too long. I'm wondering if that's because we didn't have that as part of our political culture. And this is the first time we're experiencing it, so we get to learn from this. Or it's simply because it's sometimes just impossible to reach agreement, and then the political citizenry have to deal with the consequences thereof.
I think the uniqueness of the situation today has a
Yeah,
huge role to play. Because if for the
yeah,
very first time you have a one seat difference between the
yeah,
majority and minority, the kind of leverage it comes with for the minority is unprecedented. It
yeah.
means that the difference between a bill passing and not passing could be
It's
one
huge.
majority member being out of the country. It could be that
Yeah,
person being in the hospital, that person
yeah,
being in maybe the Upper West region. And so on
yeah.
days like that, it's either you pull some political skirmishes to delay or you have to compromise. And
Mhm.
I think a lot of people were very eager to see how this will play out in this parliament. They called it a hung
Yeah,
parliament
yeah,
because of they thought the first time we would see the minority find ways to bulldoze the majority into listening to them. I think it on some
yeah,
occasions it almost happened. For example, on the e-levy and other matters, it almost happened. But the
yeah,
majority found a way to reconsolidate all their seats and with single seat
yeah,
margins pass things. But I think
yeah,
it's helpful for our democracy because then even the delay it brings and the knowledge that you would possibly have to compromise, it
yeah,
forces more discussion. It forces
yeah,
consideration of alternate views. Because hitherto,
yeah.
the stark majority numbers we had meant that for everything that the government wanted to pass, it
It
goes
was
through
passed.
without
Yeah,
dissent. That's a
yeah,
problem, right? It's a problem all the time. It also gives more room for parochial interest to fester. But
yeah,
in this dispensation, there's more check. It also means that on committees, the placements on committees, smaller committees, will have
yeah,
to
yeah.
mirror the larger,
The larger parliament.
which is great for oversight. And
Yeah,
so I think it's been healthy. I genuinely wish we get to a point where we have the opposition party being in the majority in parliament.
yeah.
It will
I'm
create
interested in seeing that
gridlock.
too.
It will create some
Yeah,
gridlock, but I think I just want to see how it will play out for our democracy and force some
yeah,
compromise on some issues.
yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, I'm like, at least we got to hear about the details of the e-levy
Yes.
because of that hold they had in parliament. Because if we had a stark majority, we would have just had the headline and then it's
Mhm.
passed, and then that's done. But then because we had to hold on, listen, they had to come back, try to get the public back towards supporting the idea. There was much more education, much more information put out there, and eventually at least we knew what we're entering to and we knew what to expect at the end of the day, which is much more healthy. I
Precisely.
am interested in seeing like you said, a day where the minority party is the one with the majority in parliament,
And that will
and
be
then we get
something.
to see we get to see how executive gets through their issues within parliament without the kind of compromise that we've seen in past years. But the other thing I wanted to ask you on this is specifically when you talk about the expectation that people have or the experiences that people have had within the Ghana's political system, the bipartisan state of things, and how people within these parties are gradually getting frustrated with the system itself. I'm wondering whether being bipartisan has helped at all. And people could take this question in two ways: whether being democratic has helped. I don't think that one is a question, but whether or not we would have preferred a state where we had much more stronger, smaller parties as opposed to just two dominant parties and always having to go head to head.
Before I get to the crux of the question, I'll just clarify. I think,
Yeah,
and I hear this a lot. People say that, oh, we need a strong arm government, maybe some kind of
yeah.
autocracy.
No, there's,
I think they underestimate the value of democracy, because even
we
the
do.
reason why we can dissent forcefully is because we're in a democracy. It's not
Yeah,
perfect, but it has those merits.
yeah,
And so,
yeah,
granted, that's important. On the dichotomy we have with our two parties, a lot of folks believe it's a broken system, right? That
yeah,
we have just two options and then there isn't much to choose from. And so when one messes up, you're forced to go with the other. Go with the other.
yeah.
I am not exactly sure that we are granted a solution by having a larger multi-party system. For example,
Okay.
how in Germany they have to form coalition governments.
Yeah, yeah.
That
Israel
may be
similar.
great, precisely. That may be great, but then the issue is that if at its core, the nature of our government is such that persons get away with things, or that people
Ooh,
are not as engaged to a point where they hold people to account, even in
yeah,
coalition governments, we would have those same issues. Because we
yeah.
could have a third force emerge with all good intentions. But the nature of our government and our democracy is such that there isn't as much accountability. There would always
Yeah,
be the likelihood that we would devolve into those same issues. And
yeah,
I firmly believe, and it's why I don't demonize anyone who chooses to align with either of the parties, because we will only see progress is if people are willing to stick with the so-called
democracy.
yes, and
Yeah,
then we're making it better from within in
yeah,
those parties, because the parties do have fine ideas, they have fine ideologies, but they need persons from within who are willing to carry through with the
yeah,
promise of those ideologies and marry it with our national interests. If that happens,
yeah.
regardless of who is in power, I think we'll be in good hands.
I mean, you make a point that is rarely made in there about. It's not really about the structure. It's, I think what you're pointing out is the principles that underpin the structure as to people, more like core principles of democracy, people being held accountable, people being represented, people not doing things antithetical to state interest and then getting away with it. Because whether or not it's a coalition government or it's a one party government or two party system, and those principles are still not upheld, we'll probably even be in much more worse situation
Yeah,
than we are now. Yeah, yeah. I mean, in
precisely.
recent times, we've seen discussions about the youth and their involvement in politics, and there are two things interested. I'm interested in. First, there's this popular debate about whether the youth are capable of leading, and so a lot of people tend to say the constitution is also ageist in some sense of putting age requirements, for instance, on who gets to become president. And these things tend to trickle down, which affects our core political structure, because then we've already at the very edge of it created doubts in youthful competence, and that trickles down to recently Honorable Atuforsen giving his acceptance speech as majority leader was mentioning how he had to step down for some senior members when they are tied up in primaries because the party executives at the constituency level felt he was younger and the other person was older with much more experience. And all these things reflect how much the youth feel the distrust coming from the older generation, and how much the older generation also feel incompetence towards the youth. And I'm wondering where you stand, because it seems like gradually the youth feel like they have to represent themselves because the traditional parties do not give them the room they need to stand and then reflect the ideals of the country.
On this issue, Andrew,
Yeah,
I am not one. Well, to some good extent, I think not. I think we need to have representation in politics,
yeah,
because it is. You would most likely. I think there's a lot of identity in politics, and it's not a bad thing,
yeah,
because you're
yeah,
most inclined to want to push forward the views of a particular group if
yeah,
you have some lived experience or some
yeah,
knowledge about its issues, for which reason they deserve some spotlighting. So the youth have
yeah,
to be represented. But I do not think that the panacea to solving these issues is to necessarily have the entire place full of young people. I think what we need are youth-centered ideas. And let me make an
Yeah.
example with the American political system. You know how much I love American politics. Bernie Sanders is not a young person.
No, he isn't.
In the 2015 Democratic
Yeah.
primary and the 2019-2020 Democratic primary, first
Yeah.
when he went against Hillary and subsequently against Joe Biden,
Yeah.
there's a reason why Bernie Sanders consistently got the highest share of the youth vote. Because Bernie, despite his
Mm,
age, had proven himself to be a champion of causes related to the youth, had been
yeah.
consistent on pushing those issues. And so I
Yeah.
think we need persons who are willing to make themselves vehicles of such worthy causes. And so, to
Okay.
the extent that you are 70 or you are 29 and you are willing to push forward looking ideas that prioritize the interests of those who would take on the reins of the country in the future, then you are worth a
Yeah.
shot. Because I'm sorry, but we have young persons, even on our university campuses, who are leading on a number of fronts and are a reflection of the same sorry issues we see on the national scene. There
Yeah.
also are young persons who are doing incredibly well and setting the pace for what a youth center or for what youth centered leadership will look like. So in the end,
Yeah.
like I said, it comes down to principle and your willingness to push a worthy cause. I don't think age per se. Sometimes yes, you have to pave the way for young people to come in. But I
Yeah.
just hope that we are coming in with the right ideas and the right mindsets so we don't end up becoming the same demons we've been demonizing.
Yeah, that's a tough one because people tend to say that the rot is the system, and even when good people get into the system, they get corrupted. But then I also get to think the system is obviously not the buildings. It's obviously
Yes, the
not
people.
rocks. It's definitely the people. And so, if we are talking about a rotten system that corrupts people, that system is made up of people. If we are not willing to accept that we are the problem, then there is no way of fixing these problems. In
Precisely.
recent years, we've seen two youth, at least political trends or political groups built around the youth, or maybe three. So we saw Fix the Country, which was heavily youth led. We saw the Occupy Jilobi, heavily youth led. We saw the New Force in recent times, heavily youth led. And the trend I personally have seen is that a lot of these youth led political approaches or political activism hasn't been met with uh, democratic appreciations. They've almost been met with hostility, right? In terms of, if you look at Fix the Country, Oliver being, yeah, tormented left, right, center. You look at Occupy Jilobi and the clampdowns that happened. You look at the new force and the recent issues with the events they wanted to organize, the venue hold up, etc. And it sort of creates this form of fear as to, is the youth really going to be facing resistance every single time they try to rally around a political idea or a political leader to spring up on their own? Because if we are forcing them to always go through the traditional political systems, and we are saying that place has a structural problem to some degree, and they may need to fight their way through it, or they feel that the problems are so urgent they cannot wait to have such long-term evolution within the traditional systems, and so they have to find an independent pathway to collaborate and then try to create attention and fix issues within the system. And we keep on meeting them with hostility. I don't know what you sense it's creating as a bedrock in terms of our political future as a country. Because I see it as a boiling pot that may explode in the future. And when it does, we may not want to see the consequence of that.
That's true. In fact, I wholeheartedly agree. And unfortunately, I have to also agree that it is a boiling pot that could explode. And it's because,
Yeah.
again, unfortunately, there are barriers that are intentionally put in place to prevent such voices from being
Yeah.
heard because they happen to upset the powers that be.
Yeah.
And it's an unfortunate thing with any emergent or nascent movement.
Yeah.
Even in founding our very nation, the founders had to go through
Yeah.
resistance, even to the point of
Yeah.
death,
Yeah.
just to push through these systems. Anytime you want to usurp any system, you will have to encounter these things. Again,
Yeah.
unfortunately, and it shouldn't be the case because young persons collectivizing and pushing for particular things in a democracy should be a
Yeah.
given. It should
Yeah.
be granted.
Exactly.
It should be welcome.
Yeah.
There's no need to meet young persons with such hostility and violence. What you do is to make young people begin to believe that the democracy they live in is a farce. They begin to
Yeah.
believe then that democracy is not worth fighting for, it's not
Yeah.
worth having. And you inch them towards the unpleasant point of considering
Yeah.
undemocratic options, which is
Yeah.
the last thing we want. And so, unfortunately, we sometimes create systems that encourage violence. They encourage undemocratic approaches to governance because people feel like, and that's young people, that they would
Yeah.
never ever have their say as they wish in a democracy. And it's
Yeah.
unfortunate. And I think youthful opposition to things as a threat, but simply as a
Yeah.
call to action. Take urgent steps on particular issues. It's only unfortunate
Yeah.
that, again, you saw what happened in Nigeria with
Yeah.
NSAS.
Yeah. Yeah.
Terrible situation. People had to lose their lives. And I think it says a lot about our political systems in Africa and how far we have to go to fix issues.
Yeah, that's true. And if you've noticed recently, there've been some trends towards people having this delusionary nostalgia for authoritarian rule in Ghana, saying, or if it like in response to trends of corruption or clamping down against these movements, you've seen a lot of trends around. Oh, if it was authoritarian rule, things would be far better. And it's probably because I think the youth are the most people at risk to want to return to this, because for the older generation who lived it, they know that no matter how bad the current system is, it's far better than living under authoritarian rule. For the youth who never lived under those systems, when we are sold stories of nostalgia around accountability was so strict, people could not be corrupt and all that, we tend to be deluded because we never lived it. And there's this thing about being biased towards imaginary things as opposed to the experience you're having, and they'll tell you it cannot be as bad as this, right? And that is brewing that pot where we might have to be dealing with these situations on our hands. So for me, I'm very, very, very scared to some degree about our response to youthful activism anytime we try to be very, very dismissive or try to clamp down on them in violent ways.
I agree. I agree
Yeah.
wholeheartedly. I agree.
So recently, there's been hot discussions in Ghana about Ghana's the state of the country, and we had the president give the State of the Nation's address recently. I'm going to talk about this and eventually talk about the Independence Day celebration that's coming up, because we tend to use that to reflect as a nation on our post independence struggles, on our post independence journey, as to whether the visions of the likes of Kwame Nkrumah are gradually being realized, or we are going back to days we don't want to live in. And after the State of the Nation's address, there's been skeptical controversies around, or people have varying opinions. Some people say things are getting better, some people say things are getting worse, some people say the the people in power have not been objective about how the state currently is. And that seems to be alarming, because it's different if people know that things are getting bad and recognize it, and it's different if things are getting bad and people speak as if they don't know about it, because then the ordinary citizen feels like what am I experiencing if you are telling me things are getting better and I am feeling the harsh brunt of it? I don't know what your take on the State of the Nation's address is, whether you feel the same sentiments among people, and generally what your take would be in terms of politicians being bold enough to speak to the hard issues that people will question them on. Because I think we tend to be, oh, things are going bad, we won't talk about it, we'll talk about the two things that we did great, as opposed to, sure, ignore that for a bit and address the issues that people are most concerned about.
Andrew, I tend to be very inclined to the general
Yeah,
sentiment out there because it would be simply dishonest to suggest that we are living in the best of times, or
yeah,
we're at a point where certain things have been put in place to engender any kind of hope in the ordinary
yeah,
Ghanaian. Unfortunately, we are possibly living in some of the worst times in the Fourth Republic in terms of our socio-economic status.
yeah,
And look, even if, and you can't, but even if you decide to put aside the economy, right? Even on
yeah,
social stuff, the country is declining because,
yeah,
at the very least, take something like press freedom, for instance. We have been on an upward climb over some years. And then
yeah,
suddenly we slip from, I think, 30th to 60th. And the press is supposed to be one of the vanguards of our democracy. That
yeah,
tells something about the state of affairs in the country. Then there's the
yeah,
elephant in the room, the economy.
yeah,
The exchange rate is in a sorry state. Our debt
yeah,
keeps on ballooning. Look, our debt has ballooned to a point where it's even become boring to talk about. It's become a numbing discussion. People have become used to the fact
yeah,
that we are running at such absurd debt levels,
yeah,
borrowing and borrowing. And at the very least, if there's such huge borrowing going on and people are seeing that reflect in infrastructure around them or particular things, social systems around them,
yeah,
in a way that is bettering their lives, it would make sense.
yeah,
But where one of the government's biggest policies is free senior high school, and yet in that same system, a mother takes her daughter to high school, and her daughter calls back in a month saying that she is hungry, hasn't eaten proper food in about 3 days, and she's been asked to contribute money to feed. The structure of
wow,
the academic calendar itself is so bad that you go to school, you aren't able to tell when you're vacating, you are back home in
yeah,
2 weeks. It does not engender any confidence in the status quo. And I was
yeah,
expecting that at least in this time, the approach would be to acknowledge that we are having problems and we
yeah,
recognize the problems, we empathize with you, and we are willing
yeah,
to do everything, go the long haul to fix
yeah,
them. I think, if you ask me, it would resonate more with Ghanaians for you to hear, for them to hear you acknowledge we have such problems, tell them you
yeah,
feel those problems and you are willing to work through with them, and so you hope they stick with you in working through them. But when you
yeah,
turn a blind eye, you pretend they don't exist as gravely as they do. What
yeah,
you do is to tell people that you may be talking, but I do not think the problems are as huge as you think they are. And you
yeah,
don't engender that confidence. I was listening to um, uh, a review session on the address, I think that evening.
yeah,
And how is it that we have one of the biggest humanitarian crises of this age? That is the dam spillage, which
yeah,
displaced 40,000 persons. That's a humanitarian
yeah,
crisis in the country.
yeah,
Not a word is said about that. People have lost their homes, their entire livelihoods. Their
yeah,
life moved in a couple of days from
yeah,
promising to bleak. You
yeah,
cannot do things like this and expect to engender any hope in the people. And so, unfortunately, I am not surprised people feel that way. And I also feel the same way. I go to the mart and buy things. Now, when I even go to the mart and I buy stuff, I've moved past even looking at the price to say I don't complain anymore. I don't. It's numbing, and it's always a problem when
yeah.
we begin to feel numb to issues. It's
It
unfortunate.
is. It is. It is. I mean, to double down a little bit on the economic situation. So usually the case that is made is that, oh, dating back to COVID or pre-COVID, we were doing well. COVID came and created a whole lot of issues. And obviously, if you look at the economy we ran in COVID, what I personally feel is that we're sold an incomplete story, which to some
Yeah.
extent is a false story. We were made to believe that, look, everything is under control. We would live through roses. We're given all these freebies during COVID without being told you are going to have to pay for it afterwards.
Yes.
Because if you look at what we did during COVID, we essentially borrowed. There was zero growth in the economy. People were literally staying home and on government payroll for months, or across a year. And that's like we were just borrowing and burning with zero repayment and zero revenue generation. And obviously, that would inflate, especially when if you reopen the economy, it's not like all of a sudden, boom. Even the global economy itself had to be reopened gradually, which means you would also fall in that same category and you would
Yes.
gradually take that trajectory to build revenue generation. And people were not told this because we were made to simply, it's like because we're in tough times, we were just sold a rosy story and then we're given all the freebies, thinking that, oh, when we come back from the tough times, you would understand. But I think it's part of the problem is not just that the things are getting bad, is that people were not told to prepare for this. People were not told to expect this. And to some degree, even if it was structural and it was set up to be so, I do not think our political, especially with several addresses that came through during the COVID era, I do not think if people were told from a heartfelt point perspective that, look, we are spending this amount of money because it's hard times, but when things get back to normal, we would be expected to do ABC to reset our country back to where it was. And if that expectation was set, people today would reference back to those speeches and clearly tell we were told so. And at least that would create some form of political justification for why some of these things are occurring. It's like we are doing things without predicting the consequences properly or hiding the consequences from citizens, knowing very well they are the ones to bear the brunt. And then when they come back complaining, we tell them, no, you should have known that when you were getting paid without working, it would come back to bite you in taxes in the future. How much of Ghana's political problems do you think is down to people being sold incomplete political messaging or incomplete political stories around the things that are being done and what effect it would have on them?
Can you repeat the question, the latter part? I didn't catch that.
Yeah, I was asking how much of Ghana's political problem do you think is down to the lack of incomplete messaging we get from our politicians as to the consequences that their decisions or policies are likely to have on us down the line?
I think a lot of it,
Yeah,
because when you are entering, for example, take the COVID situation,
yeah,
information is everything in the political space.
yeah,
And the last thing people want to feel is to feel they've been sold short or they've been
yeah,
taken for granted, because then it makes it evidence then that those things that were being done were not particularly the most gracious social programs.
yeah, yeah,
Political
yeah,
is an election year to woo persons. And
yeah,
so when 2 years down the line, you walk it back and say, oh, we have to pay extra taxes because of XYZ programs that you didn't ask for and we gave you, what you
yeah,
make feel like is they've been lied to,
yeah,
essentially, because telling half truths is deceitful.
yeah,
And that is the last kind of thing you want to experience in any political setup. It's unfortunate we have to go through that. And I think that people look, persons know why we pay taxes. They understand how
yeah,
we can't run any country without taxes. But when
yeah,
you run the very high moral horse to come into political office and you suggest things like we will take the country from taxation to production, then what they experience is the highest tax levels in the Fourth Republic. Again, they would feel
yeah,
like they've been so short. And it's what is happening
yeah,
today. So I think that I'm always very wary, whichever side is making very lofty promises. Are you sure you
yeah,
can follow through with these things? Because once you can't,
yeah,
it will come back to bite not just you, but the entire political
yeah,
establishment as untrustworthy. Then again,
yeah,
those seeds that have been sowed that politicians are liars, democracy is a farce, that seeds begin to bear more and more fruit and reach more
Yeah.
people. And it's the last thing
Yeah.
we want in our country.
This leads me to a much more bigger question as to our policy approach as a country, our policy construction. You follow US politics a lot, and you know that, for instance, when there's manifestos being done or being discussed within the US, it's not just the policy idea and who it could benefit. Is usually projections, studies that have been done, numerical estimations around. For instance, if we pick free SHS and there was a policy proposition being done in the US, you would see a projected number of students, what infrastructure you would need, how do you meet that, what challenges you are going to experience, where the funding is coming from, etc. A lot of the time, what we see in Ghana is policy ideas, but very little policy analysis and studies to back or to estimate what exactly the consequences will be. And so we tend to vote on the ideas and how flowery they are. But then when politicians get into power and then they get to really experience what the situation is, then we start really experiencing the consequences. Case in point, new free SHS. Lots of people didn't know how much revenue it would take from the government. Lots of people didn't know how much debt that would lead to the government to take on. Lots of people didn't anticipate these accommodation issues, these feeding issues. Also, because there was almost no proper studies done to estimate and project some of these consequences for people to be well informed about them. Do you think our policy approach as a country needs a lot more improvement in terms of being very, very specific about the implementation aspect of policies, the likely projected consequences, and what people should be expecting, and not just flowery ideas? Oh, we won't have to pay school fees anymore, or we'll get free healthcare, or whatever these freebies tend to be.
Yes, a resounding yes. First, what has to happen is that there has to be very broad consultation. There has to be very broad community engagement, such that if you're bringing about a policy with regard to, say, pre-mixed fuel or fishermen, I know that they do these things, but it has to be in a more deliberate way. So two things. One, you must broadly consult with the persons who are directly responsible for and going to be the end users of these things. And secondly, make projections, numerical projections about what you would need to see this through over, say, a 10-year period. And we can make those projections because we take a census. We have stat services. We can make projections like that. I recall I saw a very unpleasant snippet of His Excellency the President from, I think it was 2012 on BBC. He was having a conversation with David Saka. I think his name is either Stephen or David Saka. Hard talk. And he was talking about his ideas for Ghana, and he was asked about free senior high school, and he said a lot about it. Brilliant social idea. His question was, how much would it cost? He couldn't give an answer. And he kept on giving circumlocutory answers, going around in circles. And then Saka asked him, he told him that this is your flagship policy. It is the most important and most life-changing policy you're proposing for the country. You don't know how much it will cost? And I think it's telling. And it just so happened that Gazette was the one who was left. But I won't be sure it would happen to almost any other person who was proposing something, because we always have three ideas and we just don't know how they will cost us. Reason why today, now you're hearing wrangling within, people saying that we should begin to allow persons who can pay to pay for free senior high school. Find ways to, because it's just crumbling beneath our feet. And now what we are doing is that we have unfortunately guinea pigged the public education sector so much that people are now being pivot more to private schools. Leaving our once glorious institutions into ruin. And we can't continue to do that with our public sector. Any other thing, what you do is that you crumble the entire country. So definitely, yes, I agree. We need more of that.
I mean, because I try to read manifestos in detail and I get nothing. I'm like, yeah, what exactly am I getting? Because all I'm getting is ideas, and if I don't know how it will play out, then I don't know what I'm voting for. Because lots of people pick any random person on the street, they would give you pretty good ideas about what to do and how to improve things. And if the elite within the system are not giving us anything beyond ideas, then we are struggling, because then, like you said, we can't consent in a very rational way to how much are we willing to pay as a citizenry for this. How much of the cost are we willing to bear? What is it going to take from which other places that we care about? Where are you going to be redirecting the funds from? And we tend to be the ones who bear the consequences on some of these things. So
Unfortunately, yeah,
yeah. Personally, I've never voted before. I've had the option of voting in the last election, and I never did because I listened to both sides and I'm like, I don't think I'm convinced enough. I don't have even the information to decide on who would be the most ideal. And for me, I was like, it wasn't worth it going to queue. Of course, I can't continue with that attitude forever. But then it's like, if you don't if you don't get the right things to vote for and you go and make a choice that you yourself wouldn't be happy about, then it's you picking, either going to regret your decision down the line or deciding to be outside of that system.
that's true.
You have chosen the social democratic path, and I'm interested in why you like social democracy as a concept, first of all.
All right. First, as a concept in principle,
Yeah.
social democracy stands for looking out for the other person. So
Okay.
there are key values of inclusion,
Yeah.
values of solidarity, values of social
Yeah.
justice and economic justice. And
Yeah.
I think that first, for the African continent, that is makes a large chunk of the third world, the
Yeah.
path to true and collective development lies with social democracy, because it will
Yeah.
mean then that we will be creating a political system that prioritizes the masses of people and not just a select few, in hopes
Yeah.
that when the select few get what they want, it will trickle down to everyone. I don't think it works that way.
Yeah.
I think that
Okay.
idea hinges, and that's capitalism. It hinges
Yeah.
on this fanciful notion on the innate goodness of man, which is very questionable. So when we have political power, should political
Yeah.
power be used to give a leg up to the elite few who possibly may be better placed to succeed? Or do we use
Yeah.
rare political power to create bold progressive change that pulls the most forgotten along? I think the latter is the more
Yeah.
plausible one, and it's why I would always pick social democracy.
Quite interesting. Is there a social democratic party in Ghana?
This is a very interesting question.
Yeah.
So yes, and I will say yes because at the very least, there's a particular party that has adopted those ideals and
Yeah.
attempts to make those ideals the bedrock for what it
Yeah.
does, its approach to a number of issues. And so, definitely, yes, I would say, and that's the NDC largely, because it's the party
Yeah.
that's embraced these ideals. Those ideals were the fulcrum for its founding in the first place. So, yes, I think it's the party
Yeah.
most those ideals.
Lots of people tend to see political parties in Ghana take political philosophies and never practice them. So there's a lot of crisscross. Nobody really can tell which political party is practicing which ideals to its core. People will tell you, and it's funny because I'm like, I thought this party said they hold these ideals, and then they will tell you we've done the biggest social programs in the last decade, but we are the market driven party. So where do you stand then? And this party will tell you, well, we are social democrats, but we equally care about the private market because we've done injections into it. And people tend to question whether these ideals are supposed to be practiced in absolutism, or should there be room for people to pick and choose when to drop their ideals in favor of maybe the collective interest of the country.
I don't think that any ideals should be practiced in isolation or absolutism. Because what you risk doing is you risk losing out on the merits of the other side. There are merits to both sides. It just so happens that when you have particular ideals that you say underpin your political party, they should largely reflect what you do. And perhaps the reason why we do not see as much inclination or utilization of those ideals in the work of either party is because our politics is not grounded on ideals in Ghana. Our politics is grounded on other inclinations, ethnic inclinations, family inclinations, social inclinations. It's basically ideals. But
recently religious.
Religious. Precisely. But when you go to other dispensations, for example, the Democratic Party in America is the relatively social democratic party in America, relatively. And you see those values play out in its grassroots politics. A reason why I think Tuesday in the Michigan Democratic primary, over 100,000 voters voted uncommitted, which was a protest vote against Joe Biden, saying that to the extent that you continue to use your political power to fund what we think is a genocide in Gaza, we do not think it's consistent with ideals, and so we won't support you. That is a grassroots movement acknowledging what they stand for and making that the driving force for their politics. If we had that in Ghana, we'll be forced to work with ideals. But unfortunately, it's not the case. And I think if we began to do more of that, perhaps we could even have even more intellectual conversations on issues in Ghana and not reduce them to bigotry and other unpleasant issues that do not foster any real growth in our politics.
I mean, that's the hope. Some skeptics question whether it is worth it deviating from the current dictates of our politics in terms of culture, identity, ethnicity, religion, to ideals or political theories, because people feel that we as a people are not brought up in the politically theoretical way. Like, we don't have these exposures to political theories and make them our own, but at least we have an understanding of what do we care about as an ethnic group, what do we care about as a cultural society, what do we care about recently with the passing of the bills that seeks to uphold our culture, our ethnicity, our religions, and the things that we stand for. And people are questioning whether is it worth it to hope to be idealistic or to at least have a politics that's built on ideals, like let's say the Western politics is, and maybe not reflect who we are as a people? Or is it better to just stick to this and probably, like you said earlier, fight for the underlying things that would improve these representations in much more efficient ways?
I think it's possible to have infusions of such ideals even in our current state. Because note, even when you go to those same Western countries, again, back to Democrats and the Republican Party, you still see a lot of identity politics. So you'd have
very true.
lots of the Black community, the LGBT community, college educated women supporting Democrats. And you have lots of white folks, white evangelicals, and other groups, supporting the GOP. And so it's still there. But at its core, their ideals and their values still have a key role to play in their policy approaches. So it's possible we can begin to infuse them, because I have persons who I share the same political leanings with who I heavily disagree with on issues. And I think that it is in the crucible of such dissent that we would find the best answers to issues. We can't agree all the time. It is in our dissent on policy that we would have the best approach as to what to do. But if all the time it is, so long as this is my fellow man or woman from this place, I will vote for them or I will agree with them on, we'll blindly support everything. So it's possible you can still have identity politics, because again, our identities give us particular needs the particular parties may be most inclined to provide it. That's fair. But again, those value systems should still be seen in our policy approaches. That should what it should be what will guide our debates and would guide our
Yeah.
approach to issues.
Yeah. Yeah. So if I get what you're saying, it's like you can have your identities at the foundation which determine your needs, but then you just pick political ideals that reflect those needs and achieve them for you. So
Yes, yes,
don't necessarily have to be one existing outside of the other.
yes.
Yeah, two brief blocks of discussion and then we'll wrap this up. I think on Wednesdays is Ghana's
Yeah.
Independence Day, right? 6th March. And our independence has been a big part of our identity as a nation. Every year we come together, spend huge sums of money to gather people at a park, march till the afternoon, listening to a speech, and tell us how far we've come as a country. There's been debates in recent years as to whether that's a good use of our time during the independence period or whether that's a good commemoration of our independence. People would prefer to see those fundings used to maybe construct one road every independence, like establish a fund to construct one road every independence day or do something tangible that reflects the growth. And for people 60 something years down the line, that would have been 60 something buildings or 60 something roads or whatever it is. I don't know your thoughts on that as to whether we should start to outgrow the commemorative nature of Independence Day celebrations and start to look forward to much more tangible reflections in what we do on Independence Day to signify our commitment towards that growth rather than just commemorating that day and sort of after that day we return back to our very normal lives.
Mm, mm. I think it's possible to be able to have both. And I say this because,
Okay.
one, I understand the importance of having such maybe grand events, maybe not grand, but
Yeah.
events to
Yeah.
commemorate our independence. Because regardless of our situation, it's always important we have these landmark events that
Yeah.
remind us of our essence as a nation. Because again,
Yeah.
for and not for everyone, but for some people, it's on days like this that the patriotic spirit is renewed. For
Yeah. They
some
feel
people,
Ghanaian.
you feel Ghanaian again, and you are
Yeah.
reminded. Even the paradox of it sometimes is that even in the face of all the difficulty, on days like this, you rededicate yourself to your
Yeah.
Ghanaianness, for want of a better word,
Yeah.
and it reminds you to look forward to better for that same country. Events like this have that intangible effect on people. At the same
Yeah.
time, I think that we have to be forward looking and begin
Yeah.
to work in ways that reflect our needs today. I'm not a can, but one adage my mother always said was, "Yɛyɛ nea ɛhia ansa na yɛyɛ nea ɛfata."
Yeah. Nefata. Yeah.
Yes, you need to do what is most important to you. So, if it will mean
Yeah.
cutting down on expenditure for these events and beginning to, you could still have some Sith March celebration, maybe not as grand as before,
Yeah.
but then say that we would have every year a Sith March flagship project, such that by
Yeah.
Sith March, we would unveil a certain grand project in some area that would
Yeah.
be a symbol of our commemoration of independence. So it will
Yeah.
mean that every single year you'll be forced to work towards some grand unveiling of some
Yeah.
economically relevant event or thing that will help
Yeah.
people, will still be helping you commemorate independence. So we can
Yeah.
find a way to
True.
blend both. That would suit both needs of the country. But again, we should be
Yeah.
careful not to just do what is grand and end up coming back to our primary needs all the time.
Yeah. I mean, people have been more concerned about the
Yeah.
budget of these events recently because they tend to be very, very huge, and that's where these sentiments are coming from. Finally, what you've had the time to interact with the Ghana's political system. I don't know whether you are as interested in it as you are in the American politics,
Ah,
but I hope you are, and I hope I hope you follow it that much. But I just want to know your take on what you think we need to be doing next in the next couple of years, in the next 4 5 years. What do we have to make our priority as a nation to make sure that the kind of undertones that we see towards alternate forms of government outside of democracy, the kind of undertones we see about complaints of lack of representation, some of those things get sorted out so we get our democracy in shape, and have much more hope for continuous improvement within the political structure that we have.
I think it's civic engagement. And I say
Okay.
that because the reason why we have so much impunity in our politics, because politicians know that the news cycle is ephemeral around issues. And so they'll complain about
Yeah.
this, in 2 weeks it's gone. Get away with it.
Yeah.
But if you have a more engaged population, more
Yeah.
civic engagement, you are more likely to continually hold people's feet to the fire on issues,
Yeah.
regardless of time, because they are consistent on demanding things. And so we
Yeah.
need, especially young people, we need persons who are more engaged in our politics, willing to interact with our politics and do what they have to do
Yeah.
to be heard, to follow through,
Yeah.
and demand accountability. And I think
Yeah.
to ensure that we are doing this in the most sincere way, we need to have more persons. In fact, the persons who feel the most apathy towards our
Yeah.
politics are the very ones who should, in fact, be participating. Because they're the ones who would have had enough of all what they think is the bullcrap in our politics and will be
Yeah.
willing to demand for a bold new normal in our political
Yeah.
spaces. So certainly join a political party if you have to, form new movements if you have to, do whatever you must, but just stay
Yeah.
politically engaged. It is the only way that
Yeah.
we can make progress. Otherwise, then
Yeah.
the same old folks will continue to dominate the space with who they want to
Yeah.
be in there, and you would always be a minority with almost zero hope of catalyzing your interests.
Yeah, it's really been an amazing conversation with you, Solomon.
Pleasure.
One last question before you exit. Debate has been huge, has been growing. There've been a lot of progress within the debate space. But also, what I know is that a lot of the upcoming debaters are forgetting about the legends of the sport.
Ah,
You, you, you being one of them, coming from the University of Ghana, you've had several elite debate moments. Which of them has been your favorite?
oh, I think the most striking has to be when you say okay, no, let me just choose the moment. The most striking has to be the
Yeah.
one of the rounds in the Pan-African Universities Debate Championship in Tanzania in 2018,
Oh,
specifically round
yeah.
7. You weren't in that
Okay.
round, but in that round, I think opening government was a team from South Africa. I've forgotten their names, but they were in the
Yeah.
semi-finals. Opening opposition was a Zimbabwean team. They were also 0-0 in the final. I think it's
Oh,
what's his name?
okay.
But then the Zim team that was in the final, they were in 0-0.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Closing,
yeah. The two boys.
yes, closing government was a team from UG, Terku and then Halik.
Oh,
Closing
yeah,
opposition was mine, I also from UG. So we had a team Ghana closing, and
yeah, yeah.
always said, that is the fiercest debate I have ever been in my life. Look, I remember when the opening finished. You know that thing where you feel
Yeah.
like the debate is done. Like
It's
it was
done.
about
Yeah.
Jamal Khashoggi, the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, something in the
Oh, yeah,
university.
yeah, 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 yeah,
I
yeah,
think it
yeah.
was a very trendy issue at that time.
Yeah.
And closing government, Apreku comes in as government member. And I'm like, my God, this boy is possessed. And I recall my hand was shaking
Yeah.
when Apreku was speaking. My left hand was shaking, my left or right hand was shaking. And Jeremiah had to hold my hand and said, look, we've got this, calm down. Some way, somehow, we managed to
Wow.
win that round. I don't know how we won
Oof.
it. But I think it's always one of my best debate memories. And it's funny
Yeah.
enough, it's always in those moments where maybe you're most scared. But some way, somehow,
Yeah.
you pull through some
Yeah.
magic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So definitely that. And also, I have to mention, there is no greater joy no greater joy for me
Yeah.
personally in debate, my debate experience, than
Yeah.
seeing persons come after you and exceed what you have done. It's such
It's
a
it's
beautiful thing to see. You know that
it's
things
incredible,
are
to
in
be
progress.
honest.
It's incredible
Yeah.
because you see how they
Yeah.
began, and you watch them 2 years on, and they are giving speeches, and you have goosebumps, and you feel so proud. There's this, I
Yeah.
can't explain the feeling. Like watching people like
Yeah.
Elisha, Wesley, I
Yeah.
can't name them, but it's always nice
Yeah.
seeing the progress. I hope it continues on that upward journey in the sport.
Yeah, we hope so. We hope so. I have too many debate memories, so from now
You would have a
I
lot.
won't pick one.
You'd have a lot.
But
Oh, and
yeah,
let me say
yeah,
this just for your listeners.
yeah,
You know that rivalry between UG and KNUST in the
yeah, 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 yeah,
debate
yeah,
space, it is as old as anything old, and it still continues. But if I
yeah,
had to mention, I think Jeremiah shares the same sentiment. If I had to mention
yeah,
our
yeah,
favorite team from KNUST, I think
yeah,
it was you and Bannerman. There was just look,
yeah,
I couldn't believe there was so much space in my heart for a team from KNUST. I remember when your team didn't qualify from the semi-final in, was it Koforidua
yeah,
in
yeah,
Ghana
yeah,
versus
yeah, yeah.
Somalia? We
Koforidua,
wanted to go and
Koforidua.
no, like these guys deserve the final shot. Honestly, you were one of the best teams I've
God.
seen from Tech, and it hurts me you guys didn't break
Yeah,
your room. I doff my
yeah.
hat to you both.
I mean, for the two of us, we were brokenhearted within those moments, but eventually I'm glad we both left like the nationals debate space feeling we were satisfied. We had done what we had to
Yeah.
do and we are okay. But that partnership is one that I look back on and I'm like, oh God,
Or
there's
definitely
been
one of my top. When I
partnerships.
mention best
Yeah,
partnership, I'll mention that partnership. Solid partnership, honestly, solid
yeah,
partnership.
yeah, yeah. You guys were always threats. You and Jeremiah were
Oh,
always
it
threats
got to
because
the
we
point
come for
we walked into
competitions
the
and
room, people are angry. In the room.
strategy sheets on strategy sheets. Bannerman is like, you, Jerry and Solo, what do we do about them? Like, Charlie,
Oh my god,
was
good
tough
old
back
days.
then. Yeah. I was telling Solomon Jeremiah when I had the episode with him, and I was telling him I I could hear, I could identify his voice from a very far point. Sometimes even when somebody reads a speech, if Jeremiah was the one who wrote it, I could tell. And that was the detail to which we were trying to study the two of you to get an understanding of how to beat you guys. Sometimes you guys were too unpredictable. Like
Oh
why?
goodness, debates. One of the
Yeah,
best
but debate
ever.
has been fun. And just on the
Honestly,
rivalry bit, like I always tell people, look beyond the stories you've heard, look beyond the rivalries,
yes.
make your own relations, build your own friendship groups because the rivalries are superficial. The people behind those rivalries, lots of them are great people, to be honest. Yeah. Thank you very much,
Yeah.
Solomon, for joining
And the
me.
rivalry is not even among, it's not even, what do you call it? The rivalry is not even just about persons, it's about moments.
Yeah.
But those
Yeah, it
moments don't
is.
ruin friendships. They don't. Anyway,
Exactly, exactly. It is about moments. You are the one who said this thing in the most profound way, actually, because it's not like the rivalry is about everything that happens between these societies.
no,
It's
it's
our
moments.
specific moments where we hold on to, and then it becomes so big.
Yeah.
Look beyond it. Like some of my best friends or some of the best people I've worked with down the years has been people from University of Ghana. Elisha, I've worked on several projects across board with Elisha, and from several you. I'm on this episode with you. We've
We went
had
on cup together.
several chats. Yeah, we worked on CAP. We've had several conversations about so many different things. And if you don't move beyond the rivalries, bro, you miss out on a lot of
A lot.
good people in the world. Yeah.
True.
Thank you so much. It's been an amazing conversation,
Pleasure.
and I'm sure we'll have you back here to have much more controversial and troublesome talks sometimes later.
I'll be available.
This one was safe. This one was safe.
This
We'll
was
come
safe.
back with more truffle. Yeah.
Sure. I'll
Yeah.
be up to it.
Thank you everyone for listening to this episode. See you on the next one.